Welcome back to What If the Secret German Player Was the Friends We Made Along the Way? Ever think about that? Or this guy, he's only just retired. You will struggle to find a bigger Mikel Arteta fan than me. This is my manager. There are so many aspects of management he gets so right. A lot of the recruitment is world class, the way he conducts himself in the media and represents Arsenal, his body language, his connection with the players, the lack of excuses, his ability to foster positive culture, his communication. He's improved almost every single player tangibly, and the players themselves can't speak highly enough of him. There's also definitely that Wenger-esque paternal energy beginning to grow, I feel. A steadying hand to guide us through the choppy waters of football, but also life. I also think when discussing managers of his calibre, sometimes we can find negative things to say just because we don't want to sound like we're blowing smoke. People will say in-game decisions or something, but when you press them on it, they have nothing really specific to say. By the way, if we're just going on goal involvements from subs, last year Mikel ranked 3rd for goals from substitutes and 4th for all-round goal involvements in the league, despite making only the 9th most changes. Pretty good ratio, if you ask me. So I don't wish to be overly critical or look for problems where there are none. But even with that caveat in mind, I still do have 4 questions, all of which require a bucket load of context, and none of which I think are totally fatal, even if they are big problems. But they are still uncertainties all the same. You could probably get away with some of these if you weren't trying to chase down, in my opinion, the greatest manager of all time, but we are. So,
if my grandmother had wheels, she would have been a bike.
I don't pretend to have the answer to all these, but that's why I'm sat here and he's paid the big bucks. But here are my 4 questions, worries, concerns, prompts, whatever you want to call them, he says, leaving room to change the title, for Mikel Arteta. Number 1, how do you get your hair to stay? Number 1, squad usage. Context. You can't use players you don't trust. And you can't always predict which players you won't trust 2, 10, 18, 24 months down the line after you've signed them. Information changes, opinions change. Building a squad is non-linear and takes time, and players will fall by the wayside during the process. It's also very easy to sit here after the fact in the summer and say we should have used the squad more, but was I calling for any major changes to the lineup during the season? Absolutely not. However, I still think Mikel's usage of the squad needs some attention, because it feels like, although it may not be accurate, we've ended up by the end with a group of 13 or 15 players that Mikel actually trusts. And it would be great to push that number up. And when I say actually trusts, don't give me, oh, but he came on when we were 5-0 up against Chelsea. I want to know who he's bringing on at 60, 70 minutes at the Allianz, because that's the trust I mean. Jesus and Trossard, if you're wondering. This isn't some huge problem. It's a 1.5 or 2 out of 10 kind of problem. Ultimately, win games. That's your job as a manager. But I do think it's somewhere where we're not maximising our resources, and that's his job. What would you say is a fair proportion of minutes for a senior outfield player who is a rotation option going into a season? Ignoring injuries, let's set the bar really low at 15% of the minutes. Last season, that's 702 minutes out of the 4,680 available over our 52 games, or 7.890s. In 23-24, Fabio, Emil and Reece all came in below that number. Keeping in mind who was considered a rotation option at the time through the following: in 22-23, Reece, Emil, Cedric and Kivior, although he signed in January, all came in below that number, although 15% of the minutes would be slightly different in a different season. And in 21-22, Maitland-Niles, Chambers, Kolasinac, Pablo Mari and Reece Nelson all came in below that number as well. There will be context in all of those cases, which you can pick apart and get into the weeds to on every single one of those if you want to. The point is, the overall picture is every year there's a group of senior outfield players who barely get a look in. That will improve as the squad continues to, but by 23-24, having 3 senior players who are mostly fit and available, not contributing to more than 15% of the available minutes, I don't think is something we can have moving forward. For context, in the last 3 seasons at City, Sergio Gomez is the only senior outfield player who's been in that position, with less than 15% of the available minutes. It takes time to get to that point of squad building. I'm not saying it doesn't, but next year, I think the aim should be to have 0 senior outfield players on less than 15% of the minutes. If you're here, you're contributing. If not, you're gone. Number 2, dealing with a, quote, superstar. I'm not really commenting on whether Arsenal need a superstar, nor even who I think it should be. This is more of a musing or a provocation, I guess. And it's essentially this. I would be fascinated to see Mikel deal with someone whose name hasn't grown at Arsenal. It's a question mark I have over his management, purely because we haven't seen it. Every star in the team we have, if you want to call them that, the Ødegaards, Sakas, Salibas, have become so at Arsenal. Maybe Rice is the exception, but even Rice came from a smaller club and didn't quite have that brand he does now, I would say. I look at someone like a Victor Osimhen, a Rafa Leao, or even, a Marcus Rashford. Champions League level established talents who do have a bit of that mercurial quality to them, and think, how would Mikel handle that? The only evidence we have of Mikel dealing with that sort of talent is Aubameyang, and we know where that went. And we haven't even seen Mikel target that sort of profile in the market yet, I don't think. Havertz might be the closest, considering he's standing at Leverkusen, but I think he's much more of a rehoming project post-Chelsea. His stock last summer was not even close to what it is now. Mudryk, far too early to say superstar. Maybe it's just never the sort of thing Mikel will do. Maybe he only wants those talents in the sort of 22 to 25-year-old bracket. He wants to develop them and move them forward. That's what we've seen so far, and maybe that's valid. But the reason it's a question mark is I think, and I could be wrong, to win the biggest prizes in football, you might need to work with those types of talents who are a bit more mercurial, are a bit more individually minded, who don't always put the team first to get over those lines. A Mikel player up to now has had to be hardworking, disciplined, fight for the team, put the collective over the individual always. And generally, I agree. But do we have a space for, and to win the biggest prizes in football, do we need to have a maverick or two? And can Mikel handle that in what feels like a very egalitarian group of players? If we don't sign a player with those qualities, maybe it's fine. But in that case, can we do more to allow a Bukayo Saka not to be one of the most hard-working wingers in world football? Can we get Martinelli firing again on the inside? Can we shift the tone of the team just those few notches up the scale towards platforming our most efficient, game-winning players to learn the lessons from the likes of Madrid in getting over those lines? These are genuine, non-rhetorical questions, and I'd love to know what you think, because I think it's at least up for debate. Number 3, being part of good selling decisions. This is hard because it's not totally up to Mikel. However, if we're giving Mikel credit for the good side of the recruitment, then we also need to give him his portion of responsibility for when it goes wrong. You can't have one without the other. He's either involved or he's not. My overall message here is I'd like to see more proactive sales in future. I don't and won't pretend to know the ins and outs of the contract situations, internal conversations and so on in any individual case, why this player went then or didn't go then, but there's a big picture here that I don't think we've maximised. Okay, follow my logic here. If you're going to be developing the team so aggressively as Mikel does every year, and I think should, by the way, then you'll know what you want to do ideally next season, in this case, in 24-25, every summer. Right now, Mikel will know how he wants to change the team in certain aspects. He's been mostly vague, although he has been specific about box efficiency, but we know he will change it. So, by that logic, right now he will know which players might become more redundant next year due to the changes in the game model. And my question, and it is a question, is this. Can we be more proactive with getting rid of those players? Can we sell a Kieran Tierney in summer 2022 for brilliant money rather than the pittance we'll get for him now if you know you're after a Martinez or a Zinchenko to change that position that summer? Maybe we heard about Raya late and couldn't sell Ramsdale last year. Fair enough. But if we knew we always wanted rid of Ramsdale eventually, how much is a Ramsdale worth last summer compared to now or maybe even next? When Bayern was sniffing around Tomiyasu for huge money, if we don't see him being the guy, which considering how many defenders we've signed since him appears to be the case, could we have come to some kind of deal? And who will it be this year? Because I think there will be someone. Dare I say it, if we sign a left winger, Martinelli spends the year on the bench, how much is he worth next summer with 2 years on the deal compared to now? Is it not worth being proactive now if, and I'm not saying this is what I would do before you spam my comments, but if Mikel sees the evolution of the team on that side? If. You can't convince me Mikel doesn't have incredibly detailed thoughts on each player he works with, by the way, every single day. He'll know how long he feels each player has in the team before that next iteration. Timing that sale is hard, no doubt, but it feels like we land on the other side of that sale bell curve almost every time. And I just think there's a few too many cases where we've lost value on players and we didn't necessarily need to. You can't sell if there's no buyer. It's not always that clear. I know. Context. But I would love to be shocked by some proactive sales and then down the line look back and go, yeah, you were right. And this also stretches to somewhere else. Number 4, youth integration. It had to come up. Now, some big changes in the academy have already happened, and those knock-on effects are yet to be seen. Phil Cohen has come in from Rangers at the beginning of the year, and he's already getting to work organising trials and setting up development centres in places like Northern Ireland. And we've also had Paulo Xavier joining us, looking at the South American market after coming in from Real Madrid, hoping to unearth some gems. But our handling of the likes of Amario Cozier-Duberry, Amari Hutchinson, Arthur Okonkwo, Ruel Walters, and more up to now could be worth tens of millions of pounds, having not got them out sooner. And that can't continue. And although some youth talent will always slip through the net, that volume of talent leaving for such little recompense can't continue. Now, that's definitely not all on Mikel, but Mikel has a part to play in this. You can't put these guys on your bench and tell us you think they're basically at the level, but then not get them on earlier loans or give them the opportunities because you're still assessing them. Supposedly, he's had face-to-face chats with Chido Obi, academy players always training with the first team. He's spoken so highly about the likes of Wanieri before, but now it's time to put your money where your mouth is. Mikel and his coaching staff, together with Per and his staff, need to be more decisive. Next year, I think we'll see a change because it feels like the perfect mix of talent being there, opportunity being there with more games, and our young team having matured to a point where we can deal with new 16, 17-year-old players without falling over. There's always a reason not to play a young player, but we've now got the likes of White, Ødegaard, Rice, and so on, who are just that year or two more experienced, which could have been a barrier up to now in Mikel's mind. There's a lot of good conversations about this out there, not least one we recently had on the Cannon podcast with Tom Canton, which you can check out here. But what I feel is often missing from these conversations, and actually any conversation where you critique Mikel or the club or the players online, is this. The primary job of a manager at Arsenal is to win games with the first team. No one is saying that is not the case. And if they are, they're a spanner. But then there are all of these secondary and tertiary things that can not only support that primary goal, but could also help to turn a good manager into an era-defining one. And youth integration is one of those things. Saying Mikel could do a bit better here does not degrade all the other brilliant work he does. It does not mean there is no context. It does not mean you hate the guy. It does not mean it's priority number one. It just means what it means. Mikel could do a bit better with youth integration. Because really, all of these points are about resource maximizing. And that's really what we're pointing to here. Look at Barcelona as an extreme example. They seem to spawn a new £100 million player every 3 weeks. If you can get it right, it can go from a nice bonus to a literal game changer. We get into a weird space on the internet where only one thing is allowed to be true at any one time. And a lot of these debates end up getting really weird. I'm sure some social scientists can tell me why. But the point is, Mikel can improve here, and that's okay. With time, I think he will. But there is a question till then. Those are my 4. I'm sure there's others, maybe about certain tactical tweaks or how he handles the referees or how he's handled certain situations. As you guys know, I think the world of Mikel, but he's not perfect. However, if he can get a handle on those 4 things over the next 12 to 18 months without losing grip of anything else, it could be a huge game changer. No one is the perfect manager, but Mikel, he's pretty close. If you like The Different Knock, you can support us on Patreon monthly, or you can buy us a coffee.